You can divide those into supranuclear, nuclear, infranuclear and internuclear causes. Most commonly what we tend to see in our day-to-day practice will be usually the third, fourth or sixth nerve palsies. But there are conditions where you have to distinguish, is it a life-threatening disease or is it a ischemic etiology or which we can just observe and wait. So when you see this diagram, this from the frontal field to the oculomotor nucleus, this constitutes the supranuclear pathway. From the abducens nucleus through the MLF, which is connected to the oculomotor nucleus, this constitutes the internuclear pathway. From the abducens nerve to the right nerve through the right eye through the lateral rectus, this constitutes the infranuclear pathway. So you can have an affection anywhere in the supranuclear, internuclear as well as the infranuclear pathway. The presenting symptom usually in these patients is binocular diplopia, which is present with both eyes open, disappears when one eye is closed. So when you have an esotropia, you have an uncrossed double image. When the eye is in XT, you have a crossed image. Some patients with neurogenic palsies, they don't complain of double vision. They have a visual confusion. They have the perception of overlapping of the images. These sometimes will not be, only smart patients may be able to come with this complaint. So basically, when you approach this patient, you start with the history. How did it start? When do you see it? How is the separation of the images? What are your symptoms associated? Any pain is there? Any other weakness of the one side of the face? All these can give you a clue to arrive at the etiological diagnosis. The next is your observation. What is the position of the head? What is the position of the lid? What is the position of the eyeball? So this head postures can give you a clue to what the cranial nerve can be, because these are all the compensatory head postures taken to relieve the double vision. The next is lid position. Is it a complete ptosis or is it an incomplete ptosis which is bilateral, which is variable, which will be discussed by my colleague, or it is a bilateral incomplete ptosis. So all these points has to be noted. Last but not the least, you should not miss out the pupil. It could be, you should never miss the pupil size, whether is there any anisocoria. Next is make a note of the globe position, whether the eye is in an adducted position or is it in an abducted position. What is the globe position? You have to make note. Next comes your examination, your basic examination, your visual acuity with and if needed with pinhole, with or without pinhole, you have to rule out the monocular cause. The next is a cover test. Do you have any phorias or trophias? You have to rule it out. The next is your ductions and version. What do you mean by duction? Duction is a uniocular eye movement, whereas version is a binocular symmetrical movement of the eye. Next is measuring the angle of the deviation by prisms. Other tests are your Maddox rod testing, saccades, then your diplopia, hestatic. The next is pass pointing. Pass pointing is, this distinguishes an acute from a long-standing palsy. And the last is your field of binocular single vision. So coming to the primary and secondary deviations, you need to know what is the primary. In all cases of binocular diplopia where you are suspecting any cranial nerve pathology, it is important you do the primary and secondary deviation. So what is your primary deviation? Primary deviation is fixing with the normal eye. The deviation observed with the other eye when the normal eye fixes, and the movement what is taken up in the paretic eye is the primary deviation. Whereas the secondary deviation is fixing with the paretic eye. So when the paretic eye is fixing, you need an extra innervation going to the based on your Hering's law, you need to have an extra innervation going to the other eye so as to compensate for this movement. So the secondary deviation will always be more than the primary deviation in all cases of paralytic strabismus. This Hess charting, some centers, institutes have it is available, but in private practice, if it is possible, you can have this. It gives a better clue in detecting what is the field defect. Even subtle defects of superior oblique palsy are detected this. Your neurogenic as well as your mechanical restriction of movements could be distinguished by the plotting of the Hess charts also. One use of this Hess chart is when you follow up these patients, you know what is the whether the patient is improving, what is the amount of deviation. All this could be taken out from the Hess charting. The next is also diplopia charting. This is a simple where the patient is made to wear the red and green goggles, and he is asked to say how much separation of the images on which side. That gives you a clue that this nerve is involved. There is maximum of separation of images. Suppose you have a right lateral rectus palsy. The patient says, I have the maximum separation of images on my right gaze, that is on dextroversion. So you know this is how it is identified. Suppose you have a right superior oblique palsy, there is a maximum separation of images on left down gaze. Okay. The next is a binocular field of vision. Though this, it is not done in many places, but you need to know what is this. This is a kinetic perimetry where the patient is plotted with the binocular field of vision. He is made to see the target until he sees a diplopia. Then when it doesn't, where he doesn't see, so this way the chart is plotted. So as said, the infranuclear causes is mainly affection of the third, fourth and sixth cranial nerves. As you see, you have involvement of the brainstem, that is the fascicular involvement, or you could have from here to here, this is the subarachnoid space involvement, and this part is the involvement of the cranial nerves within the cavernous sinus, and this is the intraorbital part. So when the distribution, according to the distribution of the third, fourth and sixth cranial nerves, as you can see, the sixth is the most common. And the etiology, if you can see, vascular cause is the most common. But basically when we say third nerve, it is an ischemic nerve. Fourth nerve, we tend to say it's a trauma nerve. Sixth nerve, we say is a tumor nerve. So when you have a sixth nerve palsy, you should think of a space occupying lesion. When you see a fourth nerve, trauma is usually the most common cause. When you see the third nerve, usually it is ischemic, but always look for other associated signs and symptoms which help you to diagnose the condition. So we'll be seeing this. This was a 61-year-old hypertensive female who presented with an incomplete pupil involving third nerve palsy. She was imaged and referred to us. She came for a second opinion to us. So this is her 9 gaze. As you can see, there is an adduction, elevation and depression restriction. So what do you do? This was her imaging, first imaging. The patient was normal. She was saying, still I am not relieved of the complaints. So would you like to investigate further? Right. Still, because it was an incomplete pupil involving third nerve palsy, because your ischemic third nerve palsies are usually pupil sparing. Because the pupil was involved, we proceeded with a CT cerebral angiogram, which revealed an aneurysm, I think you can see, which was an aneurysm at the junction of the ICA and the posterior communicating artery. Incidentally, she had an ICA aneurysm which didn't have any neurological manifestation. So this aneurysm is a life-threatening intracranial pathology. Why? Because you can tend to have, if there is a risk of rupture, subarachnoid hemorrhage, patient loses consciousness, coma, the mortality is going to be high if you don't detect earlier. So coming to the anatomy, the third nerve, as everyone knows, it arises from the midbrain at the level of the superior colliculus. the specialty of the third nerve is what, it has many nuclear complex. So the nuclear involvement has a bilateral involvement. And within the brainstem, you have the fascicular involvement. You can have the other associated neurological features like hemiplegia. You have or you can have an ataxia or chorea if the red nucleus is involved. When this area in the subarachnoid space, this is the most vulnerable area because you have the aneurysms, ICA aneurysms or supraclinoid aneurysms which can compress on the arteries and which have a propensity for subarachnoid hemorrhage, or you can have a space occupying lesions. Next, within the cavernous sinus, you have the associated other cranial nerves also involved. So, as you know, the third nerve, I am not going into the detail of the anatomy, just the salient features. You can have a complete ptosis or an incomplete ptosis. You can have the pupil spat or pupil involving. The extraocular movements, you have an adduction restriction, elevation restriction, depression restriction, and normal abduction. So when you come across a third nerve palsy, the thing is that these are the points you have to identify. Whether this is a complete or an incomplete third nerve palsy, whether the pupil is involved or spared, is the superior or fourth nerve involved or not? How do you check for the superior oblique in the case of third nerve palsy? So when you ask the patient to look down, you can see the intorsion of the or the eyeball rotating downwards. So always check for the superior oblique action. The next is check out for the sixth nerve also, lateral rectus also you have to check. Then last but not the least is your aberrant regeneration. So what is the significance of pupil involving third nerve palsy is for your early detection of aneurysm, and as I said, the mortality is around 30% because of the rupture. If untreated, within 6 months it's 33% if ruptured, and in 10 years the mortality goes up to 15%. So as you can see this video, watch the lid of the left eye. You can see the lid, abnormal lid movement. This is suggestive of an aberrant regeneration. This is rerouting of the cranial nerve fibers. This patient had a traumatic third nerve palsy. This is because of the aberrant regeneration, that is regeneration of the fibers following the trauma. But you can have two types of regeneration. One is your primary, the next is your secondary. When you see in the absence of any oculomotor nerve palsy, when you see any primary regeneration, when the lid doesn't follow down or narrowing on adduction and the pupil constricts on adduction, these are all the signs of aberrant regeneration. So when you see in the absence of previous third nerve palsy, this is indicative of a space occupying lesion, an aneurysm or a meningioma compressing in the cavernous sinus. When you see a secondary to any, when the patient had third nerve, long-standing third nerve palsy following trauma or any other compressive pathology, that is a secondary aberrant regeneration. When you think of a ischemic etiology and you see after 2 months, when you see signs of aberrant regeneration, then ischemia is never the cause for the regeneration. Then your etiology, please revise your etiology. Usually in adults, the common cause is idiopathic. The next, when you have a pupil involvement, aneurysm, ischemia is the next common cause. Trauma is the other cause is 13%, neoplasm is 12%. In children, the congenital is the commonest cause, followed by trauma, the next commonest cause. So when you have a third cranial nerve palsy with an involved pupil, MRI brain, not alone MRI brain is not sufficient. You have to do with an angiogram. When you have an adult cranial third nerve palsy with a spared pupil under 50 years, still you have to do an angiogram, at the same time do an ischemic vascular evaluation. Over 50 years, watch the pupil daily, because pupil involvement in some cases of aneurysm, it can present with pupil sparing first. After 2 weeks, you can have a pupil involvement. And ESR, ischemic and vascular workup. If still ischemic etiology is diagnosed and palsy doesn't resolve after 6 weeks, it is better you image the patient. Moving on to my second case, this is a 38-year-old male who presented with complaints of double vision on looking down. He had a history of head injury with almost extraocular movements. The MRI brain was absolutely normal. This was his prism. If you can see, he had on right tilt also the hypertropia, and left tilt also there was a hypertropia, but it was more on the right, worsening with the right side. So this was his line gaze. He had difficulty in climbing downstairs and reading things. So these patients usually they don't this was diagnosed as a case of left superior oblique palsy. Sorry, bilateral superior oblique palsy. This was because of the trauma. But these patients usually they don't complain as such. On straight gaze, we don't find any vertical separation of images. But on looking down, they have a difficulty in walking downstairs. They have difficulty in reading objects, everything. So this bilateral superior oblique palsy could be because of the trauma, where the decussation takes place in the medullary vein. So the origin of the trochlear nerve is in the midbrain at the level of the inferior colliculus. This is the longest, thinnest cranial nerve, and this is most vulnerable to trauma. Nuclear lesions as such are rare, but you can have a fascicular involvement, but be careful to look for. If you have a fourth nerve, you can tend to have, it is in close association with the sympathetic, you can have a Horner's also associated with it. The subarachnoid space, this is more, as said, traumatic can be the origin. Ischemic, very rare. So when you see a superior oblique palsy, the restriction of ocular motility is very subtle. The Parkes-Bilchowski test is the only test of diagnostic value, and your fundus examination also gives you a clue on the presence of extortion, that there is a superior oblique palsy present in this eye. And moreover, this, how do you differentiate between superior oblique, because this is one of the conditions where you get vertical diplopia. There are other conditions of vertical diplopia like skew deviation, but here how do you distinguish is here the deviation persists even in supine position. So you can watch this video. He has a left hypertropia in primary gaze. That means the depressors in the left eye are affected. So on looking to the right gaze, see what happens to his hypertropia. It is worsening. On looking to the left, there is no deviation. This is Parkes step 2. Watch the Parkes step 3, where you have a tilt on the left side. If you see, the hypertropia is worsening. So this is indicative of left superior oblique palsy. So the Parkes step 1 is which eye is hyper and which gaze it is worsening, whether the right gaze or the left gaze, and which tilt it is worsening. These are the 3 steps to help you to diagnose the superior oblique palsy. There are certain fallacies in this condition also, in Parkes test also. This identifies an acute vertical muscle weakness. It doesn't identify a complex deviations or old deviations, because they tend to become committed, and vertical muscle contracture or overaction. So how do you can subjectively measure the torsion? How much is that? When you put a Maddox rod vertically in both the trial frame, ask the patient, normally you are supposed to see 2 parallel lines. But when the patient with superior oblique palsy, it tends to have a thing. You have to adjust this rod so that it becomes parallel. So that gives you an idea how much is the torsion, what is the angle of torsion. When you see on direct ophthalmoscope, extortion is seen. This is how an intorted eye will look. This is how an extorted eye will look. So there is an objective extortion and fundus photo. Subjective torsion, as well, you can measure with the double Maddox rod test. When you think bilateral, you have a positive Bilchowski cells on both the sides. Usually it is chin depressed, V pattern is present. There is some amount of esotropia present in down gaze, and greater than 10 degrees of extortion on double Maddox rod testing. And usually these patients have history of closed head trauma. Usually features of congenital fourth nerve palsy, long-standing, you ask for a family photograph. FAT scan is nothing new, it's a family album tomography. These patients have a large vertical fusional amplitude. The normal range is 4 to 6, but these patients usually with a congenital fourth nerve palsy, they have more than 10 present adapters. And you have a facial asymmetry. None of these patients complain of diplopia. So, the etiologically, if you think of fourth nerve, it is 40% traumatic, 30% idiopathic, 20% ischemic vascular, and 10% it could be due to tumor or aneurysm. The next is my 67-year-old hypertensive who presented with double vision on binocular gaze, which was present more on left gaze. He had a classical, this was diagnosed as an ischemic 6-nerve palsy. He was following up us with 2 months. Initially we diagnosed it as 6-nerve palsy, but after 2 months his diplopia persisted. He didn't show any signs of improvement. We went ahead with imaging. This is the 9 gaze thing, which showed a aneurysm on the basilar artery which was compressing the 6th nerve. So as such, the anatomy, you can have, when you have a nuclear involvement of the 6th nerve, it produces a horizontal, that is unique of 6th nerve, it has a horizontal gaze palsy because you have the nucleus of the abduction as well as the interneurons which is connected to the third nerve oculomotor nuclei. So you tend to have, when you have a nuclear involvement, you tend to have a horizontal gaze palsy. The next is your subarachnoid space where you tend to have tumors or your ICT which can cause a false localizing sign. And within the cavernous sinus, you can have associated with the internal carotid or CCF, all these lesions can produce your 6th nerve palsy. So if you have a 6th nerve palsy, the face is turned to the affected side with restriction of abduction, and esotropia is maximum on the side of the left side. Apart from that, you have to look for the 5th, 7th and 8th nerve, check for the disc situs because the 6th nerve could be a false localizing sign for your apledema, which could be secondary to due to a space occupying lesion, or it could be due to IAH. Then the cerebellar signs, limb power, next up, not the least, the pupils. The etiologies could be increased raised intracranial tension, ischemia, space occupying lesion, multiple sclerosis, neoplastic and trauma. Beware, if you have a 6th and 7th nerve, you could have a space occupying lesion also in the CT angle, which could be life threatening, or you can have a cerebral venous thrombosis or a AD malformation which can give you a 6th nerve. So when you have a multiple cranial nerve involvement, the site is the cavernous sinus. Here the only dangerous thing is if it is a diabetic patient, you have to, it's a life-threatening emergency in case of mucormycosis. The supranuclear causes, as I told, skew deviation is vertical misalignment. The ocular tilt reaction is nothing but a combination of skew deviation as well as a perception of the tilt, the same side. Thalamic esodeviation is involvement, convergence is absent because of the caudal thalamic nuclear involvement, and convergence spasm could be associated with your dorsal midbrain syndrome. This was one of the 53-year-old who was a diabetic and hypertensive who was referred to me as a case of incomplete third nerve palsy. But actually this patient had only adduction deficit. Nothing else. Apart from that, she didn't have any other features suggestive for other involvement of the third, affection of the third cranial nerve. If you look at this video, there was one sign which could give me the clue to the diagnosis. I think you would have noted that. Just go. when she looks up, you can see for here, there is an abducting nystagmus. This gives a clue that the lesion is in the right MLF. And there was an infarct in the pons. So, as said, skew deviation was a vertical misalignment. It's not a cranial fourth nerve. It can be committant or non-committant. It is not localized. Your Bilchowski will not localize this. It could be associated with your INO. Sometimes INO and skew deviation could coexist. But this vertical imbalance is on reclining to supine position, the patient says improvement. The internuclear causes, as I said, internuclear ophthalmoplegia. That is what affection, as I showed in the video, that is the involvement of the right medial longitudinal fasciculus. Whereas when you see a bilateral internuclear ophthalmoplegia, when you have both the MLF affected, your both adductions are gone, but abductions will be present. Whereas the difference between this and this is, here in the primary position, you have an exotropia. The next is the Fisher syndrome, where you have one eye, there is no movement at all. The other eye, you have only abduction present. This is the where you have the PPRF as well as the MLF affected. You have this condition which is called the paralytic pontine exotropia. Young patients always think of multiple sclerosis, and older patients think ischemic vascular disease. Consider myasthenia gravis on everyone, which is a masquerade, and also never but the least forget about giant cell arteritis in older patients. To conclude, I'll say that paralytic strabismus usually is an incomitant. You have the affection of the third, fourth, and sixth cranial nerve. The secondary is more than the primary, and it is more maximum in the direction of gaze of the affected muscle. There is a compensatory head posture to avoid the double vision with restriction of motility. Here the ductions are better than versions. There is one condition where the ductions equal the versions, that is the myogenic, which will be spoken by my colleague. The next, you have floating saccades and the negative FDT. Over time you can have an eventual spread of commitance. Thank you.